Look around the room you are in right now. For most of human history, almost none of it would have been yours to own. A tiny club of families owned the land, the laws, and the people on it. And they were almost never more than 1 in 100. They were not just rich people. By law, they were treated as a different kind of human being. And to make sure you could never join them, they built some of the most elaborate, expensive, and self-destructive rules in history. From the Palace of Versailles to the halls of imperial China, this is the story of the club that ruled the world and how it lost. Start with the math, because it is genuinely shocking. Across Western Europe, the nobility was rarely more than 2% of the population. Yet that 2% owned somewhere between 40 and 50% of all the land. In England, it got even more extreme. By 1880, around 7,000 noble families owned nearly 80% of the country. More than half of all that land belonged to just 250 families, less than 1/100% of the people. Their rank was hereditary duke, count, baron, and it passed whole to the eldest son. Younger sons often got almost nothing. Those younger sons were shipped off to the army or the church. The estate could never be split, so the bloodline could never be diluted. And here is the part people forget. Money alone could not buy your way in. What you needed was the right blood. You might object that at least they earned it on the battlefield. Once, that was true, they were warriors, knights who fought. But by the age of Versailles, the sword had become jewelry, and the battlefield had moved indoors into the rituals of the court. Nowhere was that obsession clearer than at Versailles, the palace Louis XIV built into a giant machine for ranking people. At its peak, around 5,000 personal servants and 9,000 soldiers lived inside and around the palace. And every morning, the king simply waking up became a public ceremony with a name, the lever du roi. Nobles were led into the royal bedroom in waves, in strict order of rank, just to watch him be handed his shirt. Handing over that shirt was a photo of honor, where you stood in the room told everyone exactly how important you were. Even his dinner was a show. At the grand couvert, the king ate alone at a table, while rows of nobles stood and watched him chew. The king tuned these rituals like a dial, a glance, a nod, a step closer to reward loyalty or quietly destroy a rival. That was the real genius. A noble obsessed with who hands the king his glove has no time and no money to raise an army against him. Keeping up appearances at court was ruinously expensive. Nobles sank into debt buying silk, wigs, and carriages just to be allowed to stay. To keep the line between them and you razor sharp, they even controlled what people were allowed to wear by law. These sumptuary laws were strict. Ermine, the white winter fur, was reserved almost entirely for royalty. Under one English king, purple silk, sable, and cloth of gold were limited to lords and knights. Commoners got wool and linen and nothing more. And purple was outrageous on purpose. The dye was milked from a tiny Mediterranean sea snail, so a single robe could cost a small fortune. The whole point was simple. No matter how rich a commoner got, the law made sure he could never even look like one of them. But guarding pure blood came with a horrifying price. To keep their bloodline exclusive, European royals married their own relatives. No family took it further than the Habsburgs, who ruled much of Europe for almost 2 centuries. Generation after generation of cousins marrying cousins gave them a distinctive deformity, a heavy, jutting lower jaw. In 2019, 10 facial surgeons studied 66 portraits of 15 Habsburgs, and the jaw matched the inbreeding almost perfectly. And it was not just a strange face. Inbreeding cut the survival of their children by up to 18%. In the end, the obsession ate itself. The last Spanish Habsburg, Charles II, was so frail he could not have children at all. Pure blood killed the bloodline. Now you might be thinking, fine, but isn't this just what elites do everywhere, rich families hoarding power? Not exactly. On the other side of the world, China built an elite on the opposite idea. Status there was not your blood, it was an exam. In theory, almost any man could study his way into the ruling class through the imperial examinations. In practice, it was brutal. Out of 2 to 3 million candidates a year, only about 1% passed. Candidates were sealed into tiny single cells for days at a time, watched by guards, sleeping and eating where they wrote. But the prize was real. Pass and you became a mandarin, an official with power, status, and land over an entire region. It meant decades of memorizing. Most men who finally succeeded did not pass until well into middle age, after a lifetime of trying. A ladder anyone could climb, that almost no one ever reached the top of. A meritocracy that quietly devoured whole lives. Japan found a third way. Its shogun did not need to kill his rival lords. He simply bankrupted them. Under a rule called alternate attendance, every lord had to live 1 year in his own domain and the next in the capital, Edo. And while he was away, his wife and his heir stayed behind in Edo as polite hostages of the shogun, keeping 2 grand households and parading back and forth, around a quarter of a lord's entire income. A lord too broke to raise an army is a very loyal lord. By the mid-1700s, whole domains were going bankrupt. Same goal as Versailles, disarm the powerful, but with an accountant's ledger instead of a king's bedroom. So how does a club that owned everything for 1,000 years finally come to an end? Not the way you would guess. It was not peasants with pitchforks, it was accountants with tax forms. In 1910, Britain's so-called people's budget hit the rich with new taxes on land and on inheritance. The result was staggering. Between 1909 and 1914, around 800,000 estates were sold off. Then came the First World War. Income tax leapt from 6% to 30% in just 4 years. And the young heirs who were meant to inherit those estates were dying in the trenches. In 1919, death duties on the very largest estates jumped another 40%. For families already gutted by the war, it was the final blow. They sold the land, then they sold the house, then they watched it be torn down for scrap. A war and a tax bill did, in about 20 years, what no peasant revolt had managed in 1,000. But here is the strange ending. The aristocracy did not really vanish. It dissolved into you. The very word courtesy comes from court. It literally means how you were expected to behave in front of a king. Saying please and thank you, the fork, which side the knife goes, who is introduced to whom. All of it began as court etiquette to mark the insiders. The rules they built to keep you out, you now use every single day without even thinking about it. You did not storm the gates, you absorbed them. They spent 1,000 years and rivers of money trying to prove they were a different kind of human. In the end, the only thing of theirs that truly outlived them was their table manners. If you enjoyed this hidden history, subscribe for more stories behind the everyday world, and I'll see you in the next one. Mind your manners.